Recognize Umbral Walker D01. Recognize the Caleb G D02.
Hello, team. Welcome to the cave. This is episode 7 of Whelmed, the Young Justice Files. I am everyone's favorite sidekick, Caleb, and I am home. I am here to introduce Rich. He needs no protection. Howard.
Oh, the best part about that is I get to be Queen Mara.
Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Whelmed. If you would like to get a hold of us, reach out on Twitter at the YJ Files or email us whelmedpodcast@gmail.com. And of course, visit our website, crashingthemode.com.
You can split your time between the surface and the sea, but not your mind. Either you're here 100% or you need to walk away. Make a decision, Calder. And make it soon.
And with that out of the way, I will turn things over to Rich to kick things off with...
Hello, Megan.
Downtime. Release date was March 4th, 2011. In-episode date is August 27th. The director was fan and personal favorite Jay Oliva, and the writer of this episode was Kevin Hops.
Just in time for your next mission.
In our mission briefing. Oh man, anybody who knows me knows I'm going to love this episode. Our pre-credit scene is after Batman saves the team from a near-fatal encounter with Clayface. He confronts Aqualad about his lack of focus that led to the team's downfall in this particular confrontation. Aqualad admits that he misses Atlantis, but Batman calls him out. Says it's not necessarily Atlantis, but maybe perhaps someone he left there. And he gives him an ultimatum of either getting his head in the game or stepping down.
So Calder arrives in Poseidonus, the capital city of the continent of Atlantis, via Zeta Tube. And let me point out, I love the underwater Zeta Tube.
Oh, I know, right?
It's so awesome. Here we get our first glimpse of the Young Justice version of Atlantean architecture and culture. After a brief conversation in Atlantean, which is really cool, with Aquaman, Calder heads over to the Conservatory of Sorcery, where he comes across Topo, an old friend. Topo is working on a mural that magically animates to show us Aqualad's origins.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a minute. Then Calder makes his way to the roof of the conservatory where he finds Queen Mara and his old friends Garth and Tula. We get a pretty clear picture that Tula is the nod that Batman was giving earlier about who he might have left behind. Calder asks Tula to accompany him to dinner that night with the king and the queen. She agrees, but we definitely get a hint that things aren't probably going to go very well for him in this dynamic. We don't know exactly why, but we have some suspicions.
The next scene, we cut over to a research facility. There is a huge block of ice encasing a shadowy and massive creature. It's clear the thing is shaped like a starfish. We learn it's been frozen for a millennia, but it is still alive and has detectable brainwaves. Volko, the chief scientist of Poseidonus, is researching the creature, and they have increased security since its discovery. We also see our first view of Prince Orm, King Orin's, who is Aquaman's, half-brother.
And then we cut to a series of short vignettes. So even though this episode's focused mostly on Aqualad, the downtime is referring to everyone. We get a quick moment back in the cave between Megan and Superboy. That's their home. That's where they live. That's pretty cute, leads to a bit of an awkward, potentially romantic moment. Then we cut back to Atlantis, where we see a group of black-clad soldiers taking down perimeter guards around Poseidonus. And we get our first glimpse of the classic Aquaman villain, Black Manta, who looks fantastic. Then we cut back to the surface with Robin. He's working out at Wayne Manor, and he's trying to work off some anxiety and jealousy, I think, about Batman working so closely with Calder. To train him to become a leader of the team, something that Bruce clearly hasn't been doing with him. Bruce in the Batcave is actually watching Robin work out on a video screen, sees his frustration. So the next scene is Bruce challenging Dick to a one-on-one game of basketball under the thinly veiled premise of hand-eye coordination training. I'll have some things to say about that scene in a little bit.
So then we cut back to Poseidonus. We are at the royal dinner, and Prince Orm is describing the creature to everyone sitting at the table. Calder Tula and Mera discuss the potential of Calder returning to the conservatory. Here we see a little bit of that payoff from Tula's awkward glance earlier, as she is once again awkward and silent. We cut back to the surface. Wally is at home celebrating Jay Garrick's birthday and eating all of the ice cream. Back underwater to Poseidonus, where Aquaman and Mera announce that Mera is pregnant, and there will be an heir to the throne that isn't Prince Orm. But this moment is interrupted by Aquaman getting called away for league business, an emergency in Tokyo Bay, and he speaks to Calder about living there and loving here.
Yeah, Calder admits to Tula just after that, after Aquaman leaves, that he has decided to stay in Atlantis, and he's doing so for her. And then she drops the bomb that she and Garth are now a couple. Calder's been gone for 2 months at this point in time, so they have moved on. That revelation is made, and Calder doesn't get much chance to react to it as actual bombs start exploding around Poseidonus. Manta's armored soldiers start attacking the city. We see Tula, Calder, and most impressively, Queen Mera using their sorcery skills against the soldiers in a very, very cool aquatic combat scene. Tula puts herself in harm's way to protect Garth, who is threatened, and then we see Calder kick into strategist mode to determine that the attacks were likely a distraction away from the science center where the giant frozen echinoderm is being held.
Then we cut back to the surface. This time Artemis is home. She is cleaning and working on her gear. Her mother comes in to tell her that she has received a Wayne Foundation scholarship to Gotham Academy. Artemis stubbornly does not want to go, but then there's a little bit of an emotional moment, and her mother convinces her that this is the chance she has to better her life in a way that her mother never had.
Yeah, it's a great scene. Cutting back to Under the Water, Calder reaches the science center, and Garth has accompanied him. Get a great opportunity to see that, though Calder got a little called out at the dinner by Queen Mera, saying that his sorcery studies had fallen far behind Garth's and Tula's in the months that he'd been gone. We get to see Calder's practical field training makes him a far better fighter than Garth in a stressful situation. At one point, Calder even pulls a Robin and disappears just before a threat arrives and takes the threat out before Garth even realizes what's happening. It's a very, very cool kind of cross-character scene. The two of them don the armor of the people that Calder took down, and they attempt to sabotage Manta's stealing of the giant frozen creature, but we see that Manta is highly competent and very brutal. They manage to stop the theft, but then Manta blows up the creature to cover his escape in what seems like a strangely over-the-top, if I can't have it, no one can kind of thing, which Caleb will now talk about.
The only piece of the creature after this seemingly strange and over-the-top explosion that is left is a very small chunk. It fits in a little box in the palm of Prince Orm's hand, and he explains that the creature is already regenerating, and he suggests that due to the damage of the science center, it is taken to the surface world for further research and study. Calder honestly wishes his friends the best and returns to the surface in time for their next mission. Batman here mentions an immense power surge in the Bialyan desert, and that kind of trails off, and we have a cut back to the Manta sub, where Manta has a conversation with our old friends, the Light. And here we reveal why this over-the-top explosion happened. This was Plan B. It was already prepared and ready to go. This was not spontaneous. This was part of the Light's forethought and strategery.
Superboy, are you alright?
I'm fine. Feeling the Aster.
All right, man. How you feel? You feeling the Aster on this one?
I love this episode so much.
Me too. Everyone knows, well, not everyone, maybe. Everyone in the RPG industry knows how much I love aquatic gaming. So, of course, I love a lot of things about this episode, but as you dig deeper, you can dig pretty deep into what this episode holds and what it shows for the future as well.
Just from a cool moment, all of the sorcery and combat that happens in this episode is beautiful. It's exciting. When I think of slinging magic in a tabletop game, this is what I envision in my head. Just the seamless power and skill. I love also the fact that this really solidifies that even though Calder has more of a combat focus, he is still using magic.
Right.
His bioelectricity, the way that he controls water, the weapons he forms from the 2 sword handles that he carries around with him, that's all combat sorcery.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a melee warrior with an extra twist of some ranged things. And what we see here is a take on Queen Mara. Now, Queen Mara is, depending on, again, there's lots of versions of a lot of these characters throughout DC history. Queen Mara has at various times just been an Atlantean sorceress. She has been in a partial elemental from another plane of existence. One way or the other, Mara has what they call hard water powers. She's able to manipulate water and create structures out of it, etc., etc. In this version of her, folds in so nicely with, we've already gotten these nods with Dr. Fate in previous episodes and Zatanna and Zatara, that there's such a sorcery history and background. They make her a full-on sorceress teaching at the conservatory. Oh my gosh. I love every freaking spell she casts. Amazing. And the scale that she does it in compared to everybody else's very intimate combats, and she is like taking out entire squads. So good.
She summons the Manta to act as a shield, but then sends it off to knock over the bridge to hit the soldiers. When she summons that octopus and the tendrils come up first and then the whole thing manifests, Oh, I love it. I love it.
And then she, just as Calder's making the decision, like they're talking in the background and you're realizing that the only reason they can talk is because Queen Mara is taking care of business. And when Calder's like, I need to get there, I'm going to the conservatory, you actually see one of those tentacles just tear a bunch of guys out of Calder's way as he's heading for the conservatory. Like it's full on good teamwork, and she, oh my gosh, so good. And of course, that's where the quote you pulled from the beginning of the episode comes from, where Prince Orm says, "You must go, I need to stay and protect the queen." And she's like, "What? I need no protection." Which is totally true.
So great. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. There's so much more in this episode.
So there's lots of little stuff. In the Secret Origins episode, we talk about how Calder is not the Aqualad from the comics. He was actually created for the TV show. And Garth is actually the original Aqualad from the comics, which is really interesting for those old fans, getting to see that they didn't ignore Garth or remove him from the universe. They actually just made it so that there was a choice, right? That little animated thing that Topo makes, it talks about how Garth or Calder could have, either one of them, become Aqualad. And Calder stepped up and Garth decided to stay with the conservatory. And so we get our old Garth in the episode, and we get this new Calder. We don't have to choose one or the other. And they make some great nods to Garth being, as he grew up, just like Robin became Nightwing, Aqualad became Tempest in the comics. So when he makes that comment about, I summon the power of the Tempest, that's actually part of his power set in the comics as well. Fantastic stuff.
There's also, related to this, very, very briefly, but in the animated movie Flashpoint Paradox.
Yeah, fantastic movie.
One of my favorites. Garth and Calder, and I believe Tula,
I think so too.
Are very briefly seen. Unfortunately, there's not more of them, but there's so much happening in that movie, I can't fault it.
Yeah, they already had 1 million characters in that thing. Yeah, it was fantastic.
Going back to the fun little magical painting that we see that Tupo made, I love that. I love that break from the action of what's happening to this little flashback. It's very clearly, hey guys, here's backstory, but it's worked into the flow and the pacing of the episode so cleanly, it doesn't really interrupt the momentum. It feels perfectly fine.
Yeah, and there's a lot going on in the background of that scene that we'll talk about in Crash in the Mode. I can't wait. But the one thing I will mention is that Tupo in the comics, and even in like Batman Brave and the Bold and some of these other depictions of Aquaman, Tupo's an actual octopus. And so it's interesting that they made him this kind of Cthulhuoid, mind flayery kind of creature. So the reason why I was specific in saying that he's in Poseidonus and not just Atlantis is because Atlantis is a continent. And typically in the comics, there are either 7 or 9 countries on the continent of Atlantis, and Poseidonus is one city, and that's it. So in each of these countries, all have their own races and twists and things. That's where you get mermaids, and you get Aqualad, who's got gills on his neck, but then you get Tula, who has no visible gills and looks entirely human, or Aquaman, who's the same. You get all this wide range of races. And so we get a chance to see Tupo. You get this nod to the comics, and then they fold him into and show this kind of cultural diversity. There's a bunch of stuff here that's going into Crashing the Mode, man. The giant echinoderm, we're going to get into that.
Yep.
Prince Orm, we're going to get into that.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Volko. I don't know what it is about Volko, but I just have this soft spot in my heart for Volko. He's always this reliable character, supporting cast character in the background. From the video game Injustice Gods Among Us, he's in it actually, updating the good world Aquaman about what's going on with the bad world Aquaman. I just love seeing him. Because I'm such an Aquaman fan, it makes me feel like whoever's writing or doing whatever they're doing cares about the characters as well. Not just the big guns like Mera, but the little supporting cast characters as well.
One of the other things that I really liked about this episode was the Atlantean language.
Oh my gosh, I've already talked so much about the subtitles and languages, and then you make up an Atlantean one? Come on, guys. I love it.
But that also goes into something I didn't like about this episode, in that they stopped speaking Atlantean. And I get it, because for the sake of this episode, there was too much going on to continue not only scripting out all of this fake language, but to put subtitles on this entire episode with all of the action on screen. That would not have worked. So it made the right call. I think ultimately they made the right call, just to transition into the comic book reality. But from an outside standpoint, I wanted to hear more Atlantean. I wished it would have continued the whole episode.
I agree with you, and I've had to think about this a little bit too, because I had the same reaction you did. Here's the two things that I came up with. So Aquaman is the only one who greets Calder when he arrives, and Calder is very formal. And so it almost feels like this beginning language that they speak is almost like I've returned after 2 months. Here's the official ritualistic thing that we do when I come back, is do this. And it might even be an old language, you know what I mean? Like Latin or something. It might be a bit of a stretch. But the other thing is really like that comic book thing of where they have the little asterisk and at the bottom it says translated from the Russian. I can kind of give it a pass, mostly because nobody else even tries to do stuff like that.
Oh, for sure.
Right? If/when we get Greg on the show or Brandon Vietti, I want to drill them about what the story is behind that development and what their thought process was about, do we do the whole episode like this or do we not? I'd be interested to see, because every time we brought something up with Greg on Twitter, he's had some really insightful comebacks. So
I like considering what happened as that formal introduction and debrief. That makes sense in my head.
Yeah.
Especially because if this Young Justice version of Atlantis has the nod to these different countries existing on this continent.
It may be a trade language, basically. Their English translation here is like their inter-country trade language.
Right, and if you're in the capital and you're at a formal state dinner, you're going to speak a neutral language that everyone can communicate with, because you're in the capital.
And though we hear it as English, I picture it as something else.
Sure.
Right.
I'm very willing to accept that suspension of disbelief.
Right.
And it's such a small point. Saying I didn't like this about the episode, that's nothing. This episode is so gorgeous overall.
Yeah. The other thing, too, not just, of course, I could talk all day about Calder, but like the glimpses of, we get every character's home life. And this is something I talked about in our intro episode as well. The idea that the Teen Titans comic was about them creating a family. If you wanted to see their home life of Superman or Batman, you wanted to read their own comics, but you didn't get that in Justice League. But in Teen Titans, these sidekicks didn't have their own comics, so you got to see everything about their lives and how they related to each other. This is the first glimpse of Artemis's home life that we get to see, right? With her mom, who rolls in a wheelchair. we don't know what her story is and what's going on with that. And Artemis is changing gears from this rough and tumble, I'm going to defy all authority, to showing this immense amount of compassion and kindness to her mother. Like, you can see that her first reaction is to defy her mother, but her second reaction is to realize that she's being terrible to someone who's trying to care for her. Great scenes. And then you see Wally's completely the opposite happy home life with basically adoptive grandparents and parents that are happy, and everybody knows who he is and his superpowers, and he doesn't have to hide anything. And Robin's anxiety about this, relationship with Bruce, and it's just so good. It's this great collage of things, while we also happen to move the meta plot forward as well.
And one of my absolute favorite scenes, just for how silly and ridiculous it is in this episode. Superboy is sitting on the couch in front of a blank television. McGann is in the background. Do you want help with the TV? And his response of no is just so sullen and angsty, but it's perfectly in character.
I
just love it.
But I love it. Right after that, even better, I think, is where she says, "Do you want to help me with dinner?" And he's all, "No." But just as he's saying no, he gets up and walks into the kitchen to help her anyway.
And then, of course, she responds by dumping food all over him.
Right.
And he returns to sitting on the couch in the exact same position.
But the great thing is when Red Tornado walks in. So you've got three people, Tornado and Superboy and McGann, who are completely oblivious to a lot of normal, quote unquote, Earth human culture and dynamics. And Tornado walks in and sees Superboy on the couch with eggs all over his head, and McGann clearly like awkwardly just cutting things, and he's like, what is happening? So good. Oh my gosh.
And that's the thing. We've got this huge battle going on in the ocean. We've got these great little vignettes of characters' home life and family life. Right. And there's still this beautiful little quick moment of just pure awkward humor.
Yeah.
And it fits.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop the plot. It doesn't stop the momentum. It's just part of this home life, this family that Young Justice is creating.
Right.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
I think we have a lot to talk about storytelling-wise here. Should we transition over to our Canary Debrief?
Yeah, let's do a little debrief.
Stick around. Class is in session.
This episode starts with one of my favorite storytelling devices, where it just cuts us into the middle of the action.
In media res, baby.
Yep. And the fact that we are seeing the end of a fight where we don't know what happened, we don't know what the mission was leading into it, but the team gets trashed.
Yeah, trashed by one person.
I mean, it's Clayface. We know Clayface is a beast, but
yeah.
I love that. I love seeing that. Even though we've seen the team be successful, we see the team coming together, we see the team training, they're not experts yet. They're not at the top of their game.
Yeah, I hear you. And I have to bring up a thing that happens. I mentioned a lot about rewatching these episodes. I realize and discover different things each time I watch these episodes, even now. I always thought, because of the way they transition between quote-unquote Gotham and the cave, they have a shot of Batman, and Gotham fades away, and the cave shows up, and Batman's in the same position. My brain went to Danger Room with that. I thought it was a training exercise for the first 50 times I've seen that episode. Because it always bugged me. I was like, why do they say that it's Gotham when it's actually a holodeck exercise? That's not appropriate storytelling. That's lying to the watcher. I thought they were just standing in front of the Zeta Tube, but they look like they're walking out of the Zeta Tube. And then he says, clean up and hit the showers. So clearly they're covered in goo. It's one of those things that just you miss, right? For some people, that they would have caught that the very first episode and not even thought about it. I just didn't happen to. Which makes it an even more brutal scene to me, because before I was like, oh, Batman came in and saved them from, a holodeck exercise. It's not that stressful or whatever. Now I realize, oh no, that was actually Clayface. And that puts a whole different punch, no pun intended, actually, on that scene. But I agree with you. In media res, role-playing games, books, everything. There's a saying like, start your novel off with a car crash or a slamming coffin, right? Get people in it. Star Wars, some little ship being shot at with a giant, can't even process how big this thing is, Star Destroyer coming over the top. Drop into your action. And you can do it in role-playing games as well. Drop them into the action. You don't even have to describe what's happening. You just say, roll initiative. And then have even the players help you describe what there is. Okay, you're fighting someone and doing badly. What is it? Or if you want it to be an orc or you want it to be an ogre, say, you're fighting this ogre and he's beating you. Why is he beating you? What is it that jumps out at you about this guy? Because when you're thinking about this from an animation standpoint, you're going to want the watcher's eye drawn to that thing that's kicking the hero's butt. Something wants to be jumping out at this thing immediately about why is it unique and not just a generic bad guy villain. I love the fact that they used the Clayface version from the Batman the Animated Series. It is hands down the best version of Clayface that there is. And he is that ogre. What is tough about him? You can see it immediately. He's horrifying in all kinds of ways.
I also love in the opening scene here, after they get back to the cave, there's that glare between Robin and Calder.
Yeah.
Again, speaking to what we've said many times about this show, how just the animation carries so much reality and weight.
Absolutely. And from a character development standpoint as well, if you've got players at the table for your role-playing game, or you have characters in the book that you're writing or short story, those little scenes, like looking at what that would, they could have thrown that away, right? Robin could have walked away with everybody else and been like, I'm a grown-up. I understand what's happening. But instead, they take a step back and they say, look, would this affect him? Yes or no? Yes, it would affect him. Okay, let's think about it. Can we make that interesting? Like, how do we dive a little deeper into the character's psyche? Can we add something to this story that's something richer to this character that also adds to the group dynamic story? And in this case, the answer is absolutely yes. And I wouldn't say that Robin is being immature. He's being a 13-year-old. But it also shows a dynamic between him and Bruce of their father-son relationship and how this Bruce is a little different than some of the other Bruces we get from the other animated series and comics as well. He sees what's happening, and though he has this air of, I am the teacher and you're the soldier, kind of, he also shows this level of compassion that we get to see more of later in the series as well. And I really like that choice of having that father-son thing be a little bit more present in a way.
And I think the best payoff of what you're just explaining there, Rich, is the fact that after we cut to Dick training and being very angry, punching the wall,
right?
Just a great little scene there.
Yeah.
It's not Batman who smooths this over. It's Bruce.
Right, exactly.
It's the man, not the hero. Bruce says, let's play some basketball. Let's bond a little bit.
And he says it in his own way. In almost like a tongue-in-cheek, I'm mocking myself way, almost. Consider it hand-eye coordination. And then Robin knows exactly and starts giggling and he's in.
Yeah.
I love it.
I mean, that's a good dad moment. Let's be honest here. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. Other things I want to talk about, too, as far as storytelling. This episode tells us a lot about setting up supporting cast characters. I talked a little bit, I think, last episode about if you have an item or something or an event, you want to introduce it a couple of times before it becomes really relevant at the end of your episode or at the end of your novel or story or role-playing game, right? If you introduce characters like Volko and Queen Mara in this episode, they have a tight relationship, that they have a dynamic relationship, and that they owe a lot to Aqualad, the team, etc. So they don't necessarily come back up again in the series later on directly, but they definitely come up indirectly, and we'll talk about that under Crashing the Mode as well. So when you're setting up your NPCs, or even if you're not planning ahead, because in, say, a role-playing game, you can't really plan as much, make sure you keep track of them and do callbacks to them and have your characters, your players help to describe them and add traits to them and characteristics to them. That makes them more personal, right? If Caleb was at my table running a game and I said Queen Mara was there and I described what she looks like and that she's a sorceress and we get into this battle, I know what my through line is. My through line is Aqualad needs to get away from this battle and go do something else. But I might have Caleb as a player say, describe to me what you think Queen Mara is doing with this water or with her sorcery. And because the player is going to describe the coolest thing they can think of. And then suddenly this Queen Mara supporting cast character becomes, hammered in their imagination because they've contributed to that situation and dynamic. And as the through line of that particular adventure isn't about Queen Mara, but the through line is about something else, it doesn't matter what the technical abilities she has are. It's the dramatic background to the through line, which is Aqualad doing his thing, right? Mm-hmm. But the last thing I want to talk about is the languages we brought up. Like Caleb brought up languages. I was actually just having this conversation. Some of you will know Lou Anders. Lou Anders is a fantastic author and award-winning editor who has been on shows like the Dungeon Master's Block, talking about world building and storytelling. And he and I were just chatting because I had finished his amazing first book, Frostborn. And we were talking about language and how to use it and what it is. And we came to this kind of mutual conclusion. When you're writing a story in a fantasy world or a fantasy realm, what you're writing is translation. You are translating because they're not going to speak English. If you're not on Earth and you're on another world, they're not going to be speaking modern day American English. So do you use phrases like okay? Okay is a very distinctly North American English phrase, but it's been normalized to a point that we don't even think about it as being tied to a political campaign from middle of the last century. So when people call out authors and say, like, look, you're being very colloquial, an author has to make a decision. Do I want to be colloquial or do I want to write in Old English that nobody can understand? The same thing can be drawn not just from your novels, but into your games as well, like Caleb and I were talking about. If you have a trade language, it's okay, right? D&D has the common language. Other games have trade languages. Star Wars, everybody's assumed to speak basic. But we already know that there are a lot of languages as well. Use languages for flavor. Don't use it to slow down the story. Caleb nailed it right on the head. This Atlantean language was brilliant and added a richness to that particular scene. And they chose not to, for artistic license, do the whole episode like that. They could have. It might have been very, very cool. It might have really drawn away from the action. Also, there's something as well. Episodes like that, if you're looking for any kind of younger audience, makes it a little bit hard. Like my kids, they don't know what they're saying and they can't read or read fast. My kids don't happen to be able to read that well yet. They're very young. But other kids can't read necessarily fast enough to keep up with what's happening. If it's Spanish, that's maybe something else. But a made-up fantasy language, I don't know if you want to make that choice to go the whole way. So hand wave a little bit of it. Let yourself be a little colloquial if you need to, and be okay with that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Some great things to take away into your own home games, home writing, home projects from this episode. I think it is time to crash the mode.
Tell us something we don't know yet.
Sorry, BB. We can't risk altering the time stream. We do that, we're all feeling the mode.
As always, we are talking about spoilers here, both for Young Justice and the larger DC universe. If you do not want any secrets of Young Justice spoiled, please stop listening and skip ahead. If you're still here, get ready to be spoiled.
Okay. I got things to say.
So much to happen. So much in this episode. Go for it. Start.
Oh my gosh. The one that blew my mind was watching Artemis's little scene with her mom. The very beginning of that scene, watch the TV in the background. It's the classic comedy network or something. And the announcer is saying, coming up, another episode of Hello. And then he cuts off. And we don't know anything about McGann's background at this point in time. The fact that it was running a rerun episode of Helo Megan and she shut it off right when her mom comes in the room. So she didn't actually get to see that as well. There's no way that the watchers would have had any frame of reference for this without having watched the entire first season yet. Mm-hmm. So these perfect example of the things. And we get more and more of this as we go on with the Helo Megan thing until we finally get that payoff reveal later on in one of my favorite episodes. Amazing stuff. I love it.
I love that moment too. Going back to the very first time I watched this, never picked up on it. I absolutely never did. But now that I've watched it so many times, it stands out and it's just exciting to hear.
Gives me a grin every single time I see it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Speaking of exciting things,
yes.
Starro!
Starro!
Oh, Starro.
I'm so glad they gave Starro a nod in this, man. He was the first villain that fought the Justice League back in Brave and the Bold 28, back in February of 1960. He's made appearances in episodes of Batman Beyond, in Batman Brave and the Bold, the little mini subplot at the end of all the Brave and the Bold episodes for such a long time. He is one of the classic Justice League villains and ties directly as well into one of the first Teen Titans stories, because one of the first Teen Titans stories was them helping free the Justice League from being mind-controlled from a mind-controlling force. So they took the first Justice League comics, tied them directly into the old Teen Titans comics, somehow blended them together, and gave a nod to Starro without having to explain the wackiness of Starro as a giant intelligent starfish villain. I love it.
And on top of all of that, using Starro as part of the Light's overarching story brings everything together. Because the way Young Justice is going, we know the Light is the big bad.
Yeah.
We know they're planning everything behind the scenes, and we're just getting these little tiny dips into the larger plot. And
Yes.
It's not every episode, so we're not getting overwhelmed with it. It happens just when you kind of forget about it, and then they instantly remind you, hey, the Light's planning something.
Yep.
And now we see, oh, wait, this is some sort of weird alien with brain waves, and it regenerates. What's going on?
Right, exactly. And again, you don't need to know anything about the DC history to get that. But as soon as anybody in the know sees this giant frozen thing with a shadow of a starfish, you're like, oh God, don't wake that up.
Absolutely.
That is, don't do it. Oh man, I loved it. On that same front, actually, Prince Orm. So Prince Orm is Aquaman's half-brother. So in the story that Tupo tells, he's fighting, Aquaman's fighting Ocean Master, and Garthan and Calder help out, etc., etc. Prince Orm is Ocean Master. They do a really good job of having Orm look genuinely pleased and happy about everything that's happening in the world, including Mera being pregnant. I think they did a really good job. Though Ocean Master comes up later on, you never really make that connection in the show that Orm is Ocean Master, and that's fine because they do nod into it in the comics. Again, we've talked about these parallel comics that go with the show. You need to go pick them up. There's some great stories in there, and we get to see Prince Orm's next step of trying to regicide Mera and the baby so that he can become king down the line.
And speaking of background characters...
Oh my gosh, yes. So many good ones.
Especially in that scroll past the classroom as Calder's first showing up, we see a little green dude swimming around doing some crazy stuff. No one cares. It's just some green dude, right?
Some random creature from the Black Lagoon looking kid.
First off, obviously, this is important. We're joking about it, but this is Lagan, who is later Lagoon Boy.
Yes, in Season 2.
Yeah, there's not a payoff till Season 2. But what's I think even better about this moment is the fact that it is also serving to provide a richer environment about Atlantis.
Absolutely.
You said a little while ago, Rich, how Atlantis is a continent, and there's multiple countries, so there's multiple races. So even though it's very, very brief, we see someone else who lives in a different country. And it's this weird sea monster person, but just a cool green dude. And you forget about him. And then all of a sudden in Season 2, wait a minute, it's that kid!
Yes, exactly. And again, you see him in Season 2 and you're like, oh, that's kind of this is a new character, you know? And then you go back and rewatch Season 1 again and you're like, oh my God, is that Lagan in the background? Right?
I'll be honest, I know I should probably save this for later, but I totally forgot about this moment in Season 2. I had no idea where Lagoon Boy came from whatsoever.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with him until Young Justice. And there are several characters who are like that because some are newer or they're in other pocket comics that I haven't really been up on. So when I went back to rewatch it and saw him in the background, it was just made me so happy. It's just yet again another thing. Whether it was planted and they knew they were doing it for Season 2 or it was a callback. One or the other, it was great. The other thing that I just adore, you may appreciate this as well, is we see Laura Lemurus. Laura Lemurus is the lesser known of the 3 L alliterated love interests of Superman. So we have Lois Lane, we have Lana Lang, and we have Laura Ramirez. Laura Ramirez is a mermaid. Her last name is making reference to the Atlantis-like continent of Lemuria, which is another myth. You can look that up. But we get to see her in this. And Laura Ramirez, she's just such a character that not many people know. And you see her in this, and it's kind of a toss-away scene, like with Lagan, and we don't necessarily see her again, but you do see her in the comics. There is a pretty interesting storyline having to do with this racial differences going on in the comics, and you should check that out as well. I just love it. I love it.
And I think the last thing we want to bring up here in Crashing the Mode is the fact that Volko and Mara come back as we approach the finale of Season 1.
Yeah, the Starro tech that is the ultimate pinnacle development of the light through this entire season. First of all, the fact that it's called Starro Tech gives a nod back to Starro. But also Dr. Spence from Cadmus, Dr. Roquette from the Infiltrators episode we already spoke about, and then Dr. Volko and Queen Mara. They have all their own skills in nanotechnology, in genetics, in magic, in science, and the studying of the actual Starro creature. They all come together to help the team create the Starro Tech cure and vaccine. This could have been a Deus Ex Machina moment, but they didn't have it that way. They planted those seeds so early on, and the callbacks were fantastic in the final episode.
Absolutely. Just going to show how much dedication the people who created and worked on Young Justice have to not just making an average animated show, really bringing all these threads together in a very satisfying payoff.
I love it.
And I think with that, we can consider this mode thoroughly crashed. Let's move on to some fan service here. Rich, what have you got for us?
My fan service this week is another AMV, this one to the song Halo. Since this episode nods to some of the burgeoning and future to come relationships in the series, I wanted to highlight this particular AMV. It's fantastic. It's by Yukino Uiji-sama. We have a link in the show notes. I don't know what else to say. Like with all of our AMVs, this is chock full of spoilers, so please be aware when you go watch this. If you want to hold off on that until you get done binging the whole series, please do. But don't skip it. Go and take a look at it once you've done that. It's fantastic.
And of course, if you, listener out there, have any artwork or projects related to Young Justice that you would like to draw to our attention for our fan service segments, please let us know. You can email us or contact us directly on Twitter or over on our website, crashingthemode.com. And I think it's pretty much time to wrap up this mission and head out of the cave. Thank you so much for your time today. We really, really, truly appreciate it. Don't forget to feel the Aster.
And hashtag keep binging YJ on Netflix and stay whelmed.
You've been listening to Whelmed, the Young Justice Files podcast. Our computer is voiced by Madison Ray. Our theme was composed by Emily Mio. Our logo was created by Kevin Bates. Whelmed is a fan-made podcast and is not officially affiliated with DC Comics, DC Entertainment, Warner Brothers Animation, and any other owners of Young Justice or its related source material. As such, these companies have sole ownership of all symbols, images, names, logos, and proprietary material related to Young Justice. Original content of this podcast is ours under Creative Commons. Thanks for listening, and stay whelmed.